The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days, and neither had Emma's tears. She sat in the corner booth of the downtown diner at 2 a.m., staring at the cold coffee in her chipped mug, wondering if anyone would even notice if she just disappeared. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry wasps, and somewhere in the kitchen, a radio played a song she used to love before everything fell apart. She had $47 left to her name, a duffel bag of wrinkled clothes in a bus station locker, and absolutely nowhere to go. The eviction notice had been taped to her apartment door that morning, the final punctuation mark on a year that had stolen everything from her. Her job, her savings, her dignity, and worst of all, her hope. She didn't notice the woman at first. That's how it always is with angels, she would think later. They slip in quietly without fanfare while you're drowning in your own despair. The woman was maybe 60, with silver hair pulled back in a loose bun and eyes that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 untold stories. She wore a purple cardigan that had seen better days and carried a worn leather purse that bulged at the seams. She slid into the booth across from Emma without asking, without hesitation, as if they'd been meeting here every night for years. "You look like you could use a friend," the woman said simply, her voice warm as honey. Emma wanted to tell her to leave, to mind her own business, to go find someone else to pity. Instead, she found herself breaking. "I don't have any friends left," she whispered, surprised by her own honesty. "I don't have anything left." The woman nodded, not with pity, but with understanding. "I'm Margaret," she said, "and I know exactly how you feel. 20 years ago, I was sitting in a booth just like this one, 3 states over, wondering if I had the courage to see tomorrow." For the next hour, Margaret didn't offer hollow platitudes or easy answers. She just listened. She listened as Emma poured out the story of her mother's long illness and death, of the medical bills that swallowed her savings, of the company downsizing that took her job, of the landlord who'd run out of patience. She listened as Emma confessed her shame, her exhaustion, her fear that she'd never climb out of this hole. And when Emma finally ran out of words, Margaret reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Come with me," Margaret said. Emma hesitated. Every reasonable instinct screamed that she shouldn't follow a stranger anywhere at this hour. But there was something in Margaret's eyes, a light that Emma hadn't seen in anyone's face for so long, that made her grab her coat and follow. They walked 6 blocks through the rain to a 3-story brick building wedged between a closed laundromat and a convenience store. The sign above the door read Hope's Harbor in faded blue letters. Margaret unlocked the door and led Emma inside to a space that smelled of coffee and cinnamon, where mismatched furniture created cozy corners and the walls were covered with photographs of smiling faces. "I run a shelter," Margaret explained, flipping on lights. "Well, it's more than that. It's a place where people who've lost their way can find themselves again. We have 12 rooms upstairs, a kitchen, a computer room for job searches, and on Tuesdays, a volunteer hairdresser comes in. On Thursdays, we have a life coach. We're full right now, but my apartment is attached to the back, and my couch is pretty comfortable." Emma felt her throat tighten. "I can't pay you." "I didn't ask you to," Margaret said firmly. "I'm asking you to stay. I'm asking you to rest. And when you're ready, I'm asking you to help." That night, lying on Margaret's soft couch under a handmade quilt, Emma cried again. But this time, the tears felt different. They felt like release. The next morning, Emma met the others. There was David, a former teacher who'd lost everything to a gambling addiction and was now 6 months sober and working as a night custodian. There was Yolanda, a single mother of 2 who'd fled an abusive relationship and was taking online classes to become a nurse. There was Marcus, a veteran whose PTSD had cost him his marriage and his career, now volunteering at a youth center. Each person carried their own scars, their own stories of falling and getting back up, and each person welcomed Emma like she was already family. Margaret put Emma to work immediately, not as charity but as contribution. Emma helped in the kitchen, served meals, listened to stories, and slowly began to remember who she'd been before grief had buried her. She discovered that helping others cook breakfast made her own problems feel smaller, that listening to Yolanda's 8-year-old daughter read from her library book filled the hollow space in her chest, that organizing the donation closet gave her a sense of purpose she'd forgotten existed. 3 weeks in, Margaret sat her down with a laptop. There's a nonprofit across town that needs a grant writer. You mentioned you used to work in communications. I took the liberty of sending them your resume. Emma stared at her. But I haven't worked in months. My resume has gaps. Your resume has experiences, Margaret corrected. You cared for your dying mother while holding down a job. You survived loss and kept going. You've spent the last 3 weeks helping run this shelter. That takes skills most people in fancy offices don't have. You just need to remember your own strength. The interview was terrifying. Emma wore a donated blazer that was slightly too big and carried a folder that shook in her trembling hands. But when they asked her why she wanted the position, she told them the truth. She told them about Margaret and Hope's Harbor. She told them about learning that community wasn't something you found. It was something you built, one kind act at a time. She told them she wanted to help other organizations do what Margaret had done for her. See people not as problems to be solved, but as human beings with dignity and potential. She got the job. The night she received the call, she ran back to Hope's Harbor and burst through the door, laughing and crying at once. The residents threw an impromptu celebration with dollar store, streamers, and a grocery store cake. Margaret stood in the corner, watching with quiet satisfaction, and when Emma caught her eye, she simply nodded. No, I told you so. No self-congratulation. Just a nod that said, I knew you could. 6 months later, Emma had her own apartment again. Nothing fancy. A studio with radiator clangs and a view of a brick wall, but it was hers. She'd rebuilt her savings slowly, dollar by dollar. She'd reconnected with an old friend who'd been hurt by Emma's withdrawal during her darkest days, and they'd worked through it with honest conversations and tentative forgiveness. She'd started writing again, something she'd abandoned years ago, filling notebooks with stories about resilience. But every Saturday morning, Emma returned to Hope's Harbor. She taught a resume writing workshop. She brought groceries. She sat with newcomers in that same corner booth of the diner, buying them coffee and telling them what Margaret had told her. You're not alone. You're not broken, and tomorrow can be different. Then came the phone call that changed everything again. Margaret had collapsed during the dinner service. A stroke, massive and sudden. Emma rushed to the hospital, her heart hammering against her ribs, terrified of losing the woman who'd saved her life. For 3 days, Emma sat by Margaret's bedside, holding her hand, reading to her, telling her stories about the shelter residents and the work Emma was doing. The doctors were cautiously optimistic, but Margaret's right side was partially paralyzed, and the road to recovery would be long. The shelter, Margaret whispered on the 4th day, her voice slurred but determined. Who's running it? David's been coordinating everything, Emma assured her. But Margaret, don't worry about that now. Just focus on getting better. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. I can't lose it. It's all I have. It's my purpose. Emma squeezed her hand. You're not going to lose it. I promise. Margaret gave us all a second chance, she said. Now it's our turn to give back. We're going to keep Hope's Harbor running. We're going to take shifts, divide responsibilities, and make sure that when Margaret comes home, her life's work is still here, stronger than ever. What followed was a lesson in collective humanity that Emma would never forget. David coordinated schedules. Yolanda, now a licensed practical nurse, arranged for medical volunteers. Marcus used his construction skills to fix the leaky roof they'd been ignoring. Emma launched a crowdfunding campaign that went viral when a local news station picked up the story. People who'd once stayed at the shelter years ago came out of the woodwork, offering money, time, skills. A restaurant donated meals. A law firm offered pro bono services. The community that Margaret had built, one person at a time, came together to support her. 8 weeks later, when Margaret finally came home in a wheelchair, she rolled through the door to find the shelter not just surviving, but thriving. The walls had fresh paint. New beds filled the rooms. A therapy dog named Hope wagged her tail from the corner. And standing in the center of it all was Emma, tears streaming down her face, surrounded by the family they'd all built together. How? Margaret whispered, overwhelmed. Emma knelt beside the wheelchair. You taught us that one person's kindness can change everything. But you never realized that you weren't just one person anymore. You were a catalyst. You showed us who we could be, and we became it. This isn't just your shelter, Margaret. It's ours. It's theirs. It's everyone's who's ever needed to believe that humanity is still good. Margaret reached up with her functioning hand and touched Emma's face. I just offered you a couch. No, Emma said softly. You offered me hope when I'd forgotten what it looked like. You saw me when I was invisible. You reminded me that I mattered. And that's everything. That night, as Emma walked home through streets that no longer felt dangerous, past buildings that no longer felt cold, she thought about the title of a story she'd been writing. Just one word, her. Not Margaret specifically, but every her who'd ever reached out to a stranger. Every her who'd chosen compassion over indifference. Every her who'd remembered that we're all just humans, stumbling through this life, desperately needing each other. She thought about who she'd been that rainy night in the diner, certain she was alone. And she thought about who she'd become, not because of what Margaret had given her, but because of what Margaret had shown her was possible. Sometimes salvation doesn't come with trumpets and bright lights. Sometimes it comes in a purple cardigan, sliding into a booth at 2 a.m., saying 5 simple words, "You look like you need a friend." And sometimes, Emma had learned, the greatest thing you can do is become that person for someone else. To be the her in someone's story. To be the moment when everything changes. To be the proof that even in the darkest night, humanity shines bright enough to find your way home.